Brandon. Okay, so that's an age thing, I suppose. This is one of the Mel Brooks movies, Blazing Saddles, which is a send-up of all the genre of Western. And she's but she's also she's actually making fun of this person, or I think it's just love. I don't want Love Life. What the heck? How did that happen? All right, there we go. So now you could see she kept doing this. This is when she's much older, but she was in a movie. Oh, it doesn't actually show the movie. That's okay. If this is the German version. Why is the volume so low? I can barely hear it in here. So this is a famous movie, which oddly was made both in English, this is the English version, of course, and in German. Marlene Dietrich in Blazing Saddles is doing a mock-up or whatever of this particular piece here. And what makes that funny is, again, that kind of sophisticated play on what you already should be aware of. You know, the audience that Mel Brooks was making those movies for, not, you know, I mean, he did Young Frankenstein,
right,
as a you know, a satire or a play on all of the horror movies. He did Spaceballs makes fun of all the space movies. There's one he makes fun of all the Hitchcock movies. Psycho, I think, or something. But you know, the funniest scene in that one is where, you know, the Mel Brooks himself in a trench coat sees all these birds gathering, and he starts to run away, and the birds all shit on him, and he ends up like in a coat of bird shit. That's hilarious. But it only makes sense, of course, if you've seen Hitchcock's movie The Birds, where the birds are actually attacking people and stuff.
Yeah, satire is always contextual.
Yeah, I mean, Spaceballs, you know, is absolutely hilarious. Only if you know the relevant movies that it's making fun of, you know. Lone Star. Instead of Han Solo, you know, instead of the Millennium Falcon, he's got this
Barbie.
Winnebago that's flying around in space, you know. And instead of a Wookiee, he's got a Mog, which is Jim Candy in a funny suit. Makes him look almost like a dog. He's a man dog, a Mog. So that's another type of humor, and at the same time, it's sophisticated, makes us laugh if you're familiar with the relevant comparison, and yet at the same time, how would we define that as a fallacious argument? If anything, we could say, when we were listening to Jim Gaffigan, what was making his humor funny was a false analogy.
Yeah, I was gonna say straw man.
Straw man. I can see it, yeah. So Marlene Dietrich was not a funny, this was a serious movie. Because the movie is about Professor Unruh, the German name, which means umbrage. Sorry, it's a Harry Potter reference. But if you think about it, the professor, who's like the god of morality in this little village, where he teaches students and he's very strict, falls in love with her, on sight, basically. And she just totally manipulates him, and before long, he becomes the laughing stock. So it's absolutely a horrible movie demonstrating that, the most moral people can fall the hardest, or, lots of different ways of interpreting. So this was a serious movie in German and English, but at the same time, her whole career was basically redoing this song time and time again because it was so famous. But so the humor comes as a hilarious play off of it. So not all humor seems to equate to fallacious arguments. So not all fallacious arguments are humorous. Not all jokes are fallacious arguments. Maybe jokes, but not all humor. So humor in that sense is a broader category than just jokes. I suppose that's how we would work it. Well, so the next issue today that I wanted to move on to was definitions. How many kinds of definitions are there? And I could put this in ChatGPT, but notice this is an AI tool. This is just Google, but it's in other words, Google is ChatGPT, a variant of it. Just asking the question. And this is part of a logic book, usually part of the language portion, so early in the book, which is useful in the sense that you're already aware that categorical thinking, what Aristotle teaches in his syllogistic reasoning, is categorical. We have sets of things that we compare with one another. A statement, you have the subject set and the predicate set, and you're saying this is, all of these are this, none of these are this, some of these are this, some of these are not this. And now, of course, thank you, Quine, we can also say they're equivalent to another variant of that. But we're using categories. And it's like, Western languages use categorical thinking. And so we think there are sets of things that we can define. And as a result of that, we can come up with facts about them. And facts are usually are relationships between categories of things that help define the thing. And for that to work, we think of the universal as the category. So all tables in French are feminine. I don't know why that is, but that's the case. Tables are French. In French are feminine. But the portion of a language chapter in the earlier chapters of a logic book is to show you just how difficult it is to come up with the kinds of categories that are necessary for that kind of thinking. And that's part of the ambiguity that we're faced with in trying to deal with that, because what we mean by definitions are actually easily broken up into lots of different definitions of definitions, categories of categories. And just as with fallacious arguments, when I asked the internet for a list of fallacious arguments, notice that there were multiple lists, different ways of categorizing fallacies. Notice that if you go on to the web and you ask, and there's multiple opportunities here, you have the Wikipedia, number one. I haven't clicked on that yet, but I'm curious to see what Wikipedia will say. But notice, just looking at this list, you said your book had 15? 10. 10.
That's right.
You know, ostensive definitions. When I ask the quiz question for the class today is, what kind of definition, what definition of a definition do you think most important in our understanding of early child development, language learning? And generally speaking, and I have even historical sources, St. Augustine, that talks about language learning. Not sure if he's the earliest one. Actually, Aristotle must talk about it, because in his tool, you know, all the various types of logic and grammar and everything, he talks about the parts of speech and so on, which kind of amazingly relevant to English-speaking people as well as ancient Greek. But ostensive definitions, that's how St. Augustine thinks of it. You're teaching a child the language by saying, this is a case, this is a case, these are both cases. That's an ostensive definition. I'm pointing at the thing, literally. Ostensive means to point at and say what it is. And even in Genesis, if you're familiar with that text, God sends the animals for Adam and Eve to name them, to see what names they came up with. And that sounds an awful lot like if you've ever raised a child. Children make up names for things. Once they're into naming, they start calling things, they make up their own names, right? And it's funny to see what name they give it. So, that's actually a story written by a parent who knows that, God is a parent. He shows these new toys to these young kids, and the kids name them. My new stuffed bear will be Joey. It won't be Joey. Says Brian, or whatever his name is. So ostensive definitions. They point to examples. That's a piano. That's a piano. That piano is a grand piano. That piano is an upright. That piano is electronic. And if you can buy an electronic piano, which is $450 and will sit on a table and give you 150 different musical instruments, plus ways of learning how to play the piano, plus music already included, why on earth would you want to buy a grand piano, which will cost you more just to have it delivered and retuned once it arrives? And by the way, if you're living in this state and your electricity goes off for a week, the piano is ruined in the cold and the dry air. Pianos don't do well. Every year, UAA sells all the pianos that they had bought that year in a piano sale, because they buy new pianos and sell the old ones. because in Alaska they deteriorate that quickly. Actually, I don't know if UAA still does that. Our music department has really had difficulties with the cutbacks.
They're always in there going loud as hell when I'm in my art classes. I'm not knocking. I think it's great, but I'm just saying I hear them all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go by the list here. Intentional definitions attempt to convey the sense of a term. So that's typically when I'm trying to